Every frame you notice, every story that holds you, every idea that moves culture, there's a system behind it. This is Empath with Carolyn DeClue and Bo DeClue, where creativity meets strategy and careers are built with intention. Breaking down the tools, the workflows, and the decisions shaping creative careers. New episodes every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Empath. Feel the creativity.
This is Empath, and I'm Carolyn DeClue.
And I'm Bo DeClue. Feel the creativity.
This episode is brought to you by Neon Alchemy. Story is how companies become human. We handle that part. Link in the show notes. New episodes every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Find us wherever you listen.
Okay, before anyone worries we're doing back-to-back AI episodes just because it's an easy topic to keep filling time with, we should explain why this one had to come right after last week.
Last week was about consent. Who owns the data that trained the model? This week has something else, and it only makes sense once you've already worked through the first one.
Because last week was about protecting work that already exists. This week is about whether the next generation ever builds the work in the first place.
There's a distinction researchers are drawing right now that drives this whole conversation. Adults lose skills to AI. That's atrophy, and it's reversible, the same way a muscle comes back once you start using it again.
But a kid who never developed the skill to begin with isn't losing anything. There's nothing there to lose.
Which some researchers are calling foreclosure instead of atrophy. And foreclosure might not come back the same way, which is a much bigger claim than it sounds like at first. It reframes the whole thing because it changes what you should be protecting in your own daily practice starting now.
That's a darker framing than kids these days rely on their phones too much.
It is, and it's the reason we're doing this one right after the last week instead of spacing the AI content out. Two problems are connected in a way that only makes sense back to back. Last week was about proving where a piece of work came from. This week is about whether there's still a person capable of doing that work without the tool at all.
And it's not just a youth problem, which is the part that makes this a career episode and not a parenting one. There's fresh research on experienced creatives who handed a task to AI and then couldn't fully explain the choices in the finished piece. They had the output, but not the reasoning that should have come with it.
So it cuts across every age and experience level at once.
Which means this isn't really an AI versus no AI question. It's a question about which parts of your process you're allowed to skip and still end up with the skill intact.
So here's where we're going today. Industry Pulse, the numbers on how widespread this already is on both sides of the career ladder.
Deep Dive gets into how art schools are handling this right now. Plus, an invisible move from a discipline where losing a fundamental skill can be the difference between a safe outcome and a dangerous one. And it's not one either of us saw coming.
Career strategy is what you personally build back into your own process, whether you're 22 or 72. Let's get into it.
You're listening to Empath, where creativity meets strategy and the path forward gets clearer. What's changing? What's staying? What actually matters? This is Industry Pulse.
Let's start with the number that made us want to do this episode. There's a 2026 workforce report called Pulse of Work from GoTo and Workplace Intelligence, over 2,000 knowledge workers and IT managers, and it found 62% of Gen Z workers admit treating AI as a crutch on the job.
Not use it often. Admit to leaning on it as a crutch. That's people naming their own dependency out loud.
And 40% of them said they can't get by without it anymore. Not wouldn't want to, can't.
Strange thing to hear from the generation that's supposedly the most tech-fluent one entering the workforce.
It's counterintuitive on purpose, I think, or at least the researchers behind it think so. There's a separate finding, a workforce assessment company that analyzed thousands of skills evaluations alongside AI-related job postings, and the signal for younger candidates wasn't positive. Employers looking for sharp problem-solving and independent thinking in entry-level hires are finding less of it than they expect.
So the tool that was supposed to make young workers faster might be quietly cooking the exact skill that makes them worth hiring in the first place.
That's the fear driving a lot of this, and it's not staying theoretical. Gartner is predicting that half of global organizations will start mandating AI-free skills assessments for employees, because leadership doesn't trust the underlying competence is still there under the AI-assisted output.
It's a strange kind of test to have to design. Prove you can still do the job without the thing you do the job with every day?
Yeah, it's like the corporate version of a pop quiz nobody wanted.
Let's get to the research that actually puts creatives specifically under the microscope, because it's not vibes anymore. The University of Exeter's DIGIT, or Digit Lab, surveyed 500 UK creative professionals last year, looking at how AI tools reshape originality, authorship, and creative confidence.
And?
One of the lead researchers, Professor Ahmed Christensen, put it bluntly. The neural connections that support memory and problem solving can weaken with over-reliance, leaving even experienced professionals less able to generate original ideas under pressure. Her line was that human imagination won't survive on autopilot.
Which tracks with something else in the research. A review pulling together dozens of studies identifies what they're calling fluency-originality trade-off. AI boosts how much output you produce while quietly lowering the originality behind it, especially once people stop generating their own ideas first and start from whatever the tool hands them.
So the volume goes up and the voice goes down, basically outsourcing your own brain rot and calling it productivity.
That's actually a good way to put it. And this isn't confined to entry-level work. Senior craftspeople report the same worry. Editors, colorists, sound designers who've spent decades building instinct, noticing that the more they lean on AI for first passes, the softer their judgment gets on calls that used to be automatic.
Veterans worried about forgetting the craft they're known for?
That should tell you this isn't a generational panic about kids on their phones. It's showing up at the top of crafts that take decades to master in the first place.
Okay, now the part that complicates the panic, because it's not one-directional. Let's look at the game industry. Since it's about as close to our audience as this gets, GDC's annual developer survey has been tracking this for a few years running. Personal AI tool usage among professional game developers climbed from 31% to 36%.
That's a modest increase.
A modest increase, but sentiment about the same usage went from 18% negative to 52% negative in the same stretch.
So more people are using it, and more people hate that they're using it at the same time.
That's the most 2026 sentence you've said all year. The interpretation researchers are landing on is that the productivity advantage is strong enough that developers keep reaching for the tool even while their own instincts are telling them something's off about it.
That's an uncomfortable place for an entire industry to be in.
And it's showing up publicly too, not just in survey data. Anime studios have been walking back AI use this year after fan and industry backlash. One survey found 38% of Japanese animation professionals fearing AI-driven job loss, and 64% of fans worried about losing human emotion and character design once AI tools handle more of it.
So the audience is picking up on the same erosion the industry is worried about internally.
That might be the most useful data point in this whole segment. If viewers can feel the difference between AI-assisted craft and something with a person fully behind it, that's a market signal, not just an ethics argument.
It means the skill isn't just a professional asset. It's a product feature people are already responding to whether or not anyone's told them what explicitly changed.
Let's get into the mechanism behind all this, because there's a name for what's happening and it's more precise than getting rusty. Researchers call it cognitive offloading, delegating a mental task to an external tool so you don't have to hold it in your own head.
Which isn't new to be fair. Writing things down is cognitive offloading. GPS is cognitive offloading, and there's research showing heavy GPS use weakens your own internal sense of direction over time.
Right, the phone number thing everyone brings up, nobody memorizes numbers anymore because the phone holds them. The question is whether creative judgment behaves like a phone number, something safe to outsource, or like a muscle, something that atrophies when you stop loading it.
And the early research leans hard toward muscle. There's a study out of SBS Swiss Business School, published in the journal Societies at the start of 2025, 666 participants in the UK, and it found a significant negative correlation between frequent AI tool use and critical thinking scores, with the cognitive offloading as the mechanism in the middle of it.
666 people is a real sample. What's the finding underneath the correlation?
That the more people offloaded analysis and idea generation to AI, the weaker their independent reasoning got. They gained short-term fluency and lost depth, and the effect was strongest in younger participants, the ones who'd had the tools available for more of their working lives.
Which is the foreclosure idea from the top of the show showing up in hard data. The people who leaned on it earliest have the least underneath it to fall back on.
There's a longitudinal version too, which matters because a snapshot can't show decay and a study tracked over time can. University students split into 3 groups over a 10-week term. One restricted from AI, one using it with metacognitive prompts, and one with unrestricted access.
Let me guess which group struggled at the follow-up.
The unrestricted group showed accelerated knowledge decay and weaker self-monitoring by the delayed. The unrestricted group showed accelerated knowledge decay and weaker self-monitoring by the delayed follow-up 4 weeks later. Not just lower scores in the moment, faster forgetting afterwards. The knowledge didn't stick because the effort that makes it stick got outsourced to the tool.
And you can watch this inside the animation and VFX pipeline right now, in the exact place it does the most long-term damage. The tasks AI is absorbing first are the bottom-rung ones: rotoscoping, in-betweening, cleanup, look dev, concepting. A compositing supervisor at DNEG told Rest of World this year the entry-level cleanup work is exactly what AI is taking.
And that entry-level grind is where people learned. Nobody loves rotoscoping, but the reps are how a junior builds an eye for motion and weight before they're ever trusted with a hero shot.
which is the trap. The industry's thrilled to hand off the boring part, and the boring part was the training ground. Remove the grind, and you remove the on-ramp that turned juniors into seniors.
And there's a version of this that isn't all doomed because the fix shows up in how people use the tool. The artists who stay sharp treat AI output as a rough pass to fight with, not a finish to accept. Active correction keeps the eye trained. Passive acceptance lets it go dull.
So it's not the tool, it's the posture you take toward it. Leaning back and letting it think for you is what causes the decay. Staying in the loop, questioning the output, using it as a sparring partner instead of an oracle, that's protective.
There's one more piece of the science worth putting on the table because it explains why this sneaks up on people instead of announcing itself. Researchers call it metacognitive laziness. When the tool is doing the thinking, you also stop monitoring your own thinking, which means you lose the ability to notice you're losing the ability.
So the erosion hides itself. The exact skill that would let you catch the problem is the one going offline.
Right. And it's not like a pulled muscle where the pain tells you something's wrong. It's silent by design. You'll feel more capable because the output in front of you is good, while the thing producing that output has quietly moved outside your own head.
And that feeling of capability does real damage because it removes the motivation to practice. Why drill something you feel fluent at? The confidence and the decay move in the same direction at the same time.
Which is what makes this different from every earlier tool panic. When calculators arrived, nobody felt like a better mathematician for using one. These tools do flatter you. They hand you something polished and they let you feel like you made it.
And you can't fix a problem you've been convinced is a win.
Which is the real question for the rest of this episode, not whether AI is useful. Everyone agrees it is. It's whether you're using it in the way that keeps the skill alive or the way that quietly dissolves it.
That's where Deep Dive picks it up.
The industry keeps changing. The patterns underneath it don't. This is Empath. The tools you use shape the work you create. So what's actually helping and what's getting in the way? This is Deep Dive, Tools and Workflow.
So Industry Pulse left us with a question. Does the skill survive the convenience? This segment is about the people trying to answer that on purpose, art schools, because they're the ones who have to decide what trained even means anymore.
And they're split on it. Ringling College built out a whole AI certificate this year, 3 required courses, and the person running it described the goal as helping students raise their floor, not replace their hand.
Meaning AI fills gaps in a skill set that already exists, instead of standing in for the skill itself.
That's the theory, and there's a competitive angle behind it too. The program's framed partly as helping students stand out from what one instructor bluntly called a sea of AI-generated garbage. The logic being, if everyone can generate a passable image, the differentiator becomes whatever a person can do that the generator can't.
That only works if there's still a hand behind the differentiator. RISD is taking a longer view of it, folding AI into a much longer history, generative art, computation as an artistic medium going back decades, treating the current moments as one chapter instead of whole story.
Which is a smart framing because it takes some of the panic out of it. AI stops being a rupture and starts being one more tool in a lineage that already includes photography replacing certain kinds of painting and synthesizers replacing certain kinds of orchestras.
Neither of those killed the underlying craft, they just moved where the craft lived.
And there's a version of this argument that goes back further than most people realize. When calculators showed up in classrooms, the same fight happened. Some teachers banned them outright, worried kids would never learn arithmetic. Others built them into the curriculum from day one.
How'd that actually shake out?
Depended entirely on sequencing. The classrooms that let calculators in before kids had solid number sense produced students who couldn't estimate whether an answer was even reasonable. The ones that required arithmetic fluency first, then introduced calculators for the harder, more advanced work, didn't see the same erosion.
So it wasn't calculators good or calculators bad. It was calculators too early versus calculators once the foundation existed.
Which is exactly the sequencing question art schools are wrestling with right now. Just decades later, and with a much more powerful tool. Ringling and RISD landed on Teach AI alongside Craft. The open question nobody's fully answered yet is whether that sequencing, fundamentals first, tool second, holds up once a 15-year-old can generate something polished before they've ever finished a full figure drawing from observation.
Because the calculator couldn't do your homework's reasoning for you. It could only do the arithmetic once you'd already set up the problem correctly.
Right, and that's the difference that should worry people more than it currently does. A generative tool doesn't wait for you to set up the problem. It'll happily generate a wrong answer to a question you never learned how to ask correctly in the first place.
Here's the pushback, and we should take it seriously instead of waving it off. Illustrator Molly Crabapple argues these programs serve the institutions more than the students. Her point being anyone can use AI. You don't need $200,000 of art school debt to learn how to type a prompt.
Fair hit. If the AI fundamentals course is mostly teaching prompt syntax, that's not worth a tuition bill.
Right. The value only holds if the AI instruction is layered on top of actual fundamentals, not instead of them. And it's not just art schools working this out. K through 12 is already living inside the same tension. A Rand Corporation survey found a quarter of teachers were already using AI tools for lesson planning and instruction before most of this debate even reached the headlines.
So the youngest end of this pipeline is already inside the system we're describing, before anyone's old enough to consent to it or push back on it.
Which is part of why art educators are pushing so hard on sourcing and attribution early. The National Art Education Association's actual guidance for classrooms is to lean on public domain or properly licensed material, so kids aren't absorbing bad habits about where images come from at the same moment they're absorbing bad habits about how to make one.
2 lessons getting taught at once, whether anyone planned it that way or not.
That loops back to a concept from art education researchers that might be the sharpest framing in all of this. They're calling it productive difficulty.
Meaning what?
Meaning the struggle itself, the messy middle of creative work, is where the skills get built. If a tool lets you skip the middle and land straight on a polished result, you get the product without the growth that was supposed to come from making it.
So a beautiful final image can be evidence of nothing, skill-wise, if the struggle that normally builds the hand never happened.
Which is an uncomfortable position for an educator to be in, because polish is exactly what portfolios reward, and it's exactly what a hiring manager scrolling through 100 submissions is going to notice first. The incentive structure is pointed the wrong way at every level of the pipeline, school included.
When we come back, how this lands in a working studio on a real deadline, and then this week's invisible move.
Everyone has a workflow. The question is whether it's the one you planned or the one pressure chose for you. This is Empath.
So productive difficulty explains why the classroom struggle matters. But most working creatives aren't in a classroom anymore. They're on a deadline, and nobody's grading the process.
Which is exactly where this breaks down in practice. In a studio, the incentive is always going to favor the fastest path to a deliverable the client approves. Nobody's paying extra for you to take the slow road on purpose.
So the discipline has to come from the individual, not the workflow around them, because the workflow will never reward it on its own.
And that brings us to the invisible move.
Most podcasts about creativity talk about the dream. Empath talks about the work. The tools, the workflows, the career decisions nobody explains out loud. The patterns underneath the industry that separate the people who last from the ones who burn out trying. Hosted by Carolyn DeClue and Bo DeClue every Wednesday at 7 a.m. If you're already in the creative industry or building your way in, this show was made for you. Empath. Feel the creativity.
Quick one. Every art school we just talked about is trying to solve the same problem from a different angle. How do you teach judgment when the tool can fake the output of judgment before the judgment ever forms?
Hard thing to grade at all.
Coming up, the invisible move. Pilots are required to periodically turn off the very system that makes them safer, on purpose, just to prove the human backup still works.
Stay with us.
You saw it, you felt it, but you didn't notice it. This is the invisible move.
I'm pulling this one from my time in the service, because pilots run on a principle that turns out to protect a skill in almost every discipline, not just flying. This week's invisible move is manual reversion.
Go ahead and explain this to us.
Commercial and military pilots fly almost entirely on autopilot. It's more precise than a human hand most of the time, but pilots are still required to periodically fly the aircraft manually, no autopilot. So the hand flying skill doesn't erode. Because if the automation ever fails or hits a scenario it wasn't built for, the human has to be able to take over instantly with a skill that's still sharp, not one that's been sitting unused for 2 years.
So it's not just for nostalgia, or because flying manually is more pure, it's a safety requirement.
Exactly, and that distinction matters. Nobody's arguing pilots should abandon autopilot. The instruments are safer in most conditions. The requirement exists because the two skills, automated and manual, have to coexist, and only one of them naturally maintains itself without deliberate practice.
And that last part is the piece people miss. The automated skill takes care of itself. The tool keeps it warm. The manual skill is the one that silently decays because nothing in your week forces you to use it once the tool's already doing the work.
Right. Everybody assumes the fancy skill is the fragile one. It's the opposite. The basic, foundational one is what erodes.
Which maps onto creative work almost exactly. You don't have to reject AI tools to protect the underlying craft. You just have to build in scheduled manual reversion, work without the tool on purpose, so the hand skill doesn't quietly disappear from a lack of use.
And once you start looking, it shows up everywhere close to our own world, along with a pretty clear cost when people skip it. Illustrators who work digitally still block out a piece in pencil on paper sometimes. No undo button, no AI upscaling. Skip that long enough, and what actually erodes isn't drawing ability in the abstract. It's the problem solving that happens when a composition isn't working and there's no generate button to try again with. You lose the instinct for why something's wrong, not just the ability to fix it by hand.
Animators have their own version. A lot of studios still require rough, hand-drawn key poses before anything touches a rigging tool or a generative in-betweening system, because the timing and weight of a motion has to come from human decision first. Skip that step long enough and shots start feeling technically correct but hollow. Motion that hits every mark and still doesn't read as alive because nobody's made the weight decision. The software just interpolated one.
Writers have maybe the most measurable version of this. When people lean on AI for drafting, their writing drifts toward whatever's most common in the model's training data. There's a growing stack of studies on it, including a meta-analysis this year pulling from over 100 of them, all landing on the same finding that AI quietly flattens how people express themselves. A drafting session with every AI suggestion switched off, just a blank page, forces you to generate the sentence instead of accepting the first plausible one a model hands you. And that's often the only thing standing between your voice and everyone else's.
Musicians have a version as well, sight reading practice. Playing something cold with no backing track and no loop keeps the raw skill sharp instead of leaning on a muscle memory built entirely around a click track. Skip it long enough, and the moment a live collaborator drifts off tempo and changes key on the fly, there's nothing to fall back on.
Magic runs on this too, even if nobody in my world calls it manual reversion. A sleight of hand card move only stays clean with constant repetition. The gimmick version of the trick might fool a room the same way, but the second the gimmick isn't available, if a spectator hands you their own deck, you're finished unless the actual hand skill is still there.
Photographers have a version worth mentioning too. Some working photographers still shoot manual exposure on a fully automatic camera on purpose. Dial off the auto settings, meter the scene by eye, guess the exposure triangle from memory.
Even if the automatic metering is usually more accurate?
Yes, because the day you're shooting in a situation the camera's metering can't read correctly, heavy backlighting, a stage under shifting colored light, you need to already know what your eye is telling you instead of trusting a sensor that's about to get it wrong. The automatic version works great until the exact moment it doesn't, and that's never a convenient moment to be relearning your own instincts from scratch.
Game design has its own version too, and it's maybe the least visible one on this whole list. Level designers who lean entirely on AI-assisted layout tools can produce a playable space fast, but experienced designers still block out levels on paper or in blank white boxes first. No art, no automation, just geometry and pacing.
But why does that matter if the automated version plays fine?
Because plays fine and feels intentional aren't the same thing. Pacing, difficulty curves, the moment a player is meant to feel lost versus the moment they're meant to feel capable, that's a judgment call, not a layout problem. Skip the whiteboxing step long enough, and designers lose the ability to diagnose why a space feels wrong because they've never had to build that instinct from an empty grid.
Same failure as the animator losing the sense of weight. Technically correct, nobody home behind it.
That's really the through line for every example we just walked through. The automation gets you to functional, only the manual repetition gets you to felt.
And nobody hires for functional if they can find felt somewhere else.
There's a pattern across every single one of these examples. In every case, the manual version isn't slower because it's inferior. It's slower because it's doing more work per repetition, building the exact judgment that the automated version quietly borrows without replacing.
Which means the time you spend on manual reversion isn't lost productivity. It's the only part of your week that's compounding.
That flips the usual framing on its head. People treat the AI-assisted hour as the productive one and the manual hour as the indulgence. But if the manual hour is the only one building the skill that makes the AI-assisted hours worth anything at all, the math runs the other way.
So how does someone actually know if they're doing enough of it? Is there a rule of thumb?
Not a fixed ratio, because it depends on how AI-heavy your normal workflow already is. But a reasonable starting test, if you tried to complete a full piece of your actual professional work tomorrow with every AI tool switched off, and it felt harder than it should have, that's your answer. That's the signal to start scheduling this on purpose instead of waiting to find out the hard way.
And there's a team version of this too. Pick one project a quarter and build it manually from start to finish. No shortcuts. See what the team learns about its own gaps in the process. Most of what surfaces won't be about individual skill at all. It'll be about which parts of the workflow nobody understands anymore because the tool's been quietly filling in the reasoning for months. That's worth building into a team calendar the same way an individual would build it into their own. because a workflow nobody fully understands anymore is a much bigger liability than a single person's rusty skill.
That's the invisible move.
Better workflows don't just shape the process, they shape the outcome. This is Empath. Creative work doesn't build careers, direction does. This is career strategy.
All right, we've covered the research and the invisible move. Now we make it personal. What do you build into your week to keep your own skill from quietly eroding?
Let's start with the part that should change how anyone under 30 prepares for their next interview. Because hiring itself has shifted, and most candidates haven't caught up yet.
Meaning,
Live skill demonstrations are replacing traditional interviews at a fast clip. One survey found 85% of employers now use skills-based hiring, and a separate study found 68% of hiring leaders trust hands-on demonstrations and live problem solving over resume credentials or behavioral answers.
so the take-home test, the polished portfolio piece you had a week to perfect, that's losing ground to something you have to do live, in the room?
Exactly, and the reason is telling. Companies are adding more human verification because AI makes anything done asynchronously on your own time less trustworthy as a signal. If they can't tell whether you or a tool produced the take-home piece, the take-home piece stops meaning anything.
Which means the manual reversion habit we just discussed in the invisible move isn't just good practice anymore. It's becoming the actual interview format.
That's the connection worth pausing on. Employers are converging on exactly the training method every discipline we just walked through already uses. Test the skill with the assist turned off, because that's the only version of the skill they can trust.
If you're early career, here's the practical shift. Stop treating your polished AI-assisted portfolio pieces as the whole story. Start building a smaller set of work you can walk someone through live, from a blank page with your reasoning out loud, no tool running in the background.
Which sounds intimidating until you realize it's just practice. The same way an actor keeps a monologue ready or a musician keeps a few pieces they can play cold without sheet music in front of them.
There's a real-world version of this happening at agencies right now too, not just in theory. One creative director described restructuring junior roles entirely, calling them AI editors instead of the old term, because juniors are learning fundamentals by critiquing AI output rather than producing work from scratch. Their comparison was learning to cook by tasting and adjusting a dish instead of starting out peeling potatoes.
Sounds efficient, but where's the risk in that?
The risk is exactly what we've been circling in this whole episode. That director's own team raised it directly, the fear of ending up with people who can't draw or write at all without a prompt to react to. Their fix was blunt. They started running what they call No AI Fridays, one day a week where the team works with pens, paper, and basic tools only.
That's manual reversion, just with a name nobody borrowed from aviation. A working team reinvented it from scratch, which is about the strongest evidence the principle is real.
Exactly the same instinct, arrived at independently, because the problem is the same everywhere it shows up.
There's a tension in that AI editor model too, because it's not a clean answer either direction. Some junior creatives are thriving under it, developing sharper critical judgment earlier than previous generations did, because they're forced to articulate why something's wrong instead of just producing a first draft and hoping it lands. Others are hitting exactly the wall that director's own team worried about. Strong opinions about output with no hands-on foundation underneath those opinions when a client wants something built from nothing.
So the model itself isn't the problem. It's whether critique-based learning gets paired with enough manual practice to back it up.
And there's a companion piece to this that matters just as much. Employers assessing junior candidates are already noticing a gap. One workforce assessment company found less independent problem solving showing up in entry-level hiring pools than expected. So walking in with a live work habit already built puts you ahead of a trend most of your peers haven't noticed yet.
Now, for anyone further along, this isn't just an early career fix. Remember the Exeter research from Industry Pulse, experienced professionals losing the ability to generate original ideas under pressure once they over-rely on the tool. That's the exact erosion Gartner's predicting half of organizations will start testing for.
So the strategy at any career stage is basically the same shape. Build a scheduled version of manual reversion into your actual calendar, not as an ideal, as an appointment.
Give people something concrete. What does that actually look like on any average day?
Pick one recurring block, weekly is enough, where you do a piece of your normal work without the AI tools you'd usually reach for. Not a hobby project on the side, the actual kind of task you'd be asked to demonstrate live if a client or an employer ever asked you to.
And track how it feels, not just whether you finished. If a task that used to be easy for you now feels harder than it should without the tool, that's the erosion. Caught early, while it's still closer to the atrophy than foreclosure.
Which loops back to something we said in opening frame. Atrophy comes back. You just have to notice it in time to start rebuilding before it hardens into something that doesn't.
There's a bigger structural risk underneath the individual one, no matter what side of the career ladder you're on. Analysts tracking entry-level hiring are warning that the traditional deal, junior workers trading routine labor for mentorship, is breaking down because AI is automating exactly the routine work juniors used to learn. One report put it starkly: the industry risks creating a generation of professionals who've never laid the foundation the senior people above them took for granted.
So this isn't just a personal skill question. It's a pipeline question for the entire industry, 10 years out.
Which is exactly why the fix isn't purely individual either. Programs like the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship are trying to rebuild that mentorship pathway on purpose, pairing young creatives with real paid projects and actual human feedback, not just tool access.
And there's real data backing this instinct. A 2026 creative industry survey asked working creatives what would improve their working lives. Mentorship and community outranked new tools and technology by a wide margin, over 50% naming mentorship, compared to under a third naming new software.
That tracks with everything else in this episode. People already sense that a relationship with someone further along is protecting something a tool can't replace.
So if you're early career, that's a second concrete action alongside the live work habit. Actively seek a mentor relationship, formal or informal, instead of assuming the tool can substitute for one.
And if you're senior, this is the moment to say yes when someone asks.
Worth being clear about the order of operations here too, since it's easy to hear mentor and practice schedule as two separate to-do items instead of one connected system working together toward the exact same result. The IMF's own labor research this year found something worth knowing before anyone treats retraining as optional. Workers who fell below a certain threshold of retraining participation saw AI adoption actually hurt their employment outlook. Workers above that threshold saw the opposite. Adoption started working in their favor instead of against it, and by a meaningful margin.
So there's an actual measurable tipping point here, not just a vague sense that practice is generally good for you.
Which means half measures may be worse than doing nothing at all, at least on the data available so far. A once-a-year portfolio refresh isn't going to clear that threshold. A weekly habit paired with an actual mentor relationship is a far more plausible way to land on the right side of that line.
For anyone managing junior talent or hiring right now, there's a mirror version of this worth adopting too. Build live, tool-off moments into your own interview process and your onboarding. Not as a trick to catch people cheating, but because it's the only way to know what someone can do.
It also protects the junior person. If nobody ever asks them to work without the assist, they might not find out themselves how much of the skill is actually there until the day the tool isn't available and the deadline doesn't move. Otherwise, they're basically NPCing their own career without realizing it.
And that scenario happens more than people think. Outages, client restrictions, tools your own company decides to drop. The muscle has to already be there when the day shows up, not built starting that morning.
One more habit worth building into your portfolio, since we're on the topic of what employers are asking to see now, keep a rough version of your process alongside the polished final piece. Sketches, drafts, the messy middle. Not because it looks impressive, but because it's the only proof for you and for anyone evaluating you that the judgment happened somewhere in there and wasn't just generated whole.
Which is basically applying chain of title to your own skill development instead of just your legal rights. Can you actually trace where the decision-making happened?
That's a good way to tie the two episodes together. Last week was about proving where your work came from. This week is about proving where your judgment came from and making sure going forward, there's still something there to prove.
Same discipline pointed at yourself instead of a contract.
That's the harder version because nobody's making you do it. There's no clause forcing this one. It's just you deciding the muscle matters enough to keep using it.
It's the cheapest insurance policy in this whole episode. Cost you an hour a week and $0.
The work matters, but direction changes everything. This is Empath. Behind the work, there are real people building it. This is Listener Spotlight.
Deep Dive gave us the institutions art schools trying to figure out curriculum. This half is about people running art teams right now, in the middle of it, no classroom involved. I'll take the first one. Peter Franco is SciPlay's senior art director, and he sat down with the site Deconstructor of Fun in February to talk about how his studio uses AI day to day. Concept exploration, logo development, generating progressive game states. They train custom models, run bi-weekly training sessions, because what looked impossible 4 months ago is already routine.
That's a studio all in on the tool.
Mostly, but here's the part essential to this episode. AI never produces a final asset that ships. Every piece still requires a human pass, compositing, color correction, technical optimization. His phrase to deconstruct a fund for what stays valuable was traditional art skills becoming differentiators, not disappearing.
So the team gets smaller, but the bar for the people left on it gets higher.
That's his prediction too. A smaller core of experts leveraging AI heavily rather than a large team of generalists. And he was honest that it doesn't sit easily, even for him personally. He said of watching AI move into work artists enjoy doing was that it's intruding,
Strange thing to hear from someone actively building the AI pipeline at his own studio.
which is exactly what makes it worth including instead of a pure cheerleader take. So for everyone in the audience, does Franco's perspective, traditional skills becoming differentiators, hold up as a career strategy? Or is it survivorship bias from someone already senior enough to be a differentiator? And what does shrinking army of artists mean for anyone trying to break in at the bottom right now?
My turn. Eddie Smith is the original Halo artist. He designed the Forerunner aesthetic and redesigned Master Chief for Halo 2. He spoke with the gaming site FRVR recently, and he's not anti-AI on principle. He's used it himself, but his warning to studios leaning on it is blunt. He told them, studios treating AI as a crutch to finish games are headed for what he called a rude awakening.
Why does he think that?
His argument in that same interview is that AI doesn't fix the actual reason games struggle to ship. If a director doesn't know what they want, handing them a generation tool doesn't give them a vision. It just gives them more unfocused options faster. His line to FRVR was, it's going to help you not finish games even more.
So the tool amplifies what already is there, good judgment or the lack of it.
It lines up with something ugly showing up elsewhere in games reporting this year. Working concept artists describing AI's arrival at their own studios as demoralizing, watching leadership decide they wouldn't need to hire artists at all before the tool had even proven it could replace the actual judgment those artists provide.
So Franco's studio kept the senior layer and shrank the rest deliberately. Smith's warning is about the studio skipping that judgment entirely and finding out too late.
So here's a couple other questions for the listeners to think about. Is rude awakening already happening or still a prediction? How does a studio actually tell the difference between Franco's disciplined model and the reckless version Smith is describing from the outside before signing on to work there?
We have two working professionals, same industry, same year, landing in very different places.
One's optimistic about a smaller, sharper team. One's worried the tool just lets bad decisions happen faster.
Which might both be true at the same time, depending on which studio you walk into.
The work tells a story. So do the people behind it. This is Empath. Step back, look again. What changes when the perspective shifts? This is Perspective Reset.
There's something about this whole episode I haven't been able to shake, and it's not the numbers. It's how many different people completely independent of each other arrived at the exact same fix without comparing notes.
Pilots and their manual reversion requirement. A creative director inventing no AI Fridays because his own team flagged the risk. Musicians sight reading. Photographers metering by eye. Nobody borrowed the idea from anyone else on that list.
Which tells you something. When a pattern shows up independently in that many unrelated places, it's usually because it's tracking something true about how skill actually works, not a trend anyone talked each other into.
The muscle only stays a muscle if something forces it to work occasionally. The pilot loves the autopilot. They're not rejecting the tool. They're refusing to let it become the only version of the skill they've got.
Last week's fix required other people to change. Contracts, legal precedent, an entire industry's consent infrastructure. This week's fix doesn't require anyone else's cooperation at all.
You can start it alone today, with zero permission needed from a client or an employer or a lawmaker.
That should make it the easier problem to solve, and by some ways it is. But there's a reason people still don't do it, even once they know the research.
Because the manual hour never feels as productive in the moment as the AI-assisted one does. It's slower, it's less impressive by the end of the day, and nobody's applauding you for it.
Right. The payoff is invisible until the exact day you need it. And by definition, you don't know which day that'll be.
Hard trade to make voluntarily. Delayed, invisible benefit against a very visible, immediate cost and speed.
It's the same problem as saving money for a retirement that feels theoretical, except the currency here is your own judgment instead of dollars.
Which might be the most useful way to think about it. Nobody skips retirement savings because they don't believe in retirement. They skip it because the cost is due today, and the benefit is due decades from now. And today always wins that argument unless you build a system that doesn't ask you to decide fresh every time.
So treat manual reversion the same way. Not a decision you make daily, willpower against a deadline. A standing appointment that doesn't ask permission from your mood or your workload that week.
Set it once. Let the calendar make the decision instead of you having to remake it every single week.
And there's one more thread worth carrying out of this episode. Last week's invisible move and this one are really the same instinct, pointed at two different targets. Chain of title protects the paper trail behind your work. Manual reversion protects the judgment behind it. One proves you own it, and the other proves you can still do it.
Protect the paper trail, protect the muscle. Neither one happens by accident, and neither one costs much if you start early enough.
The expensive version of both is always the one where you find out what's missing after somebody's already asking hard questions about it.
That's the entire argument in one sentence. Cheap now or expensive later. Nobody gets a third option.
There's a version of this for how people talk about their own careers too, not just how they schedule their week. When someone says they're AI first now, ask what that means before assuming it's a compliment or a warning. Franco's studio leans on AI constantly and still keeps senior artists doing the final pass on everything that ships. Some of the studios Smith is warning about lean on it just as hard and skip the senior layer entirely. Same label, opposite outcome, depending on whether the manual skill got protected under the adoption or discarded along with it.
So the label tells you almost nothing on its own. The actual question is always the more useful one, protected or discarded. Every studio, every individual career is answering that question right now, whether or not anyone's asked it.
And that's probably the right note to end on because it turns a fairly weighty episode into something you can actually act on this afternoon, not next quarter. You don't need permission, a budget, or industry-wide fix to start answering it for yourself. You need one reoccurring block on a calendar and the willingness to feel a little rusty for the first few times you show up for it.
Rusty is the whole point. Rusty means the muscle is still there, just underused, which is a much better problem to have than the one where nothing's left to find at all.
Clarity changes direction. This is Empath.
Here's where we went today. We opened on a distinction to hold on to long after this episode ends. Adults lose skills to AI, and that's atrophy. Reversible. Kids who never built the skill in the first place are dealing with something researchers are calling foreclosure instead, which might not come back the same way.
Industry Pulse gave us the numbers underneath that. Gen Z workers admitting to AI dependency at nearly 2/3. Exeter researchers warning that imagination doesn't survive on autopilot. Senior editors and colorists worried their own instincts are going soft. And an audience on the other end that can apparently feel the difference, even without the vocabulary for it.
Deep Dive got into the mechanics. Art school split between raising the floor and folding AI into longer creative history. Productive difficulty as the sharpest framing in the whole debate, the struggle itself being where the skill forms. In the invisible move, manual reversion pulled from aviation and applied across illustration, animation, writing, music, magic, photography, and game design.
Career strategy got tactical. Live skill demonstrations replacing take-home tests and hiring, a scheduled weekly appointment with the tool switched off, and a mentorship stat that surprised both of us. Creatives ranking human relationships over new software as the thing that would move the needle on their working lives.
Industry Voice gave us two working professionals landing in different places on the same question. One optimistic about a smaller, sharper team. One warning that the tool just lets bad decisions happen faster if the judgment underneath it was never there.
In Perspective Reset tied it back to something you can act on today, not abstract theory. One recurring block on a calendar, no permission required from anyone.
Let's be clear about what that means in practice too, since manual reversion can sound like a nice idea that quietly never happens. Once a week gets busy. The research this episode leaned on wasn't subtle about the stakes. A quarter of teachers already using AI in lesson planning before this debate reached headlines. 62% of Gen Z admitting to dependency. That's not a slow-moving trend anyone gets to wait out.
Which is exactly why we kept coming back to something you can start today, instead of something that needs an industry to fix first.
So okay, if you take one thing from today, the skill only stays sharp if something forces it to. Schedule the discomfort on purpose, or the tool schedules the erosion for you without ever telling you it happened.
Rusty and present beats polished and hollow every time.
And if you only take one action out of everything we covered, make it the calendar block, not the mentor search, not the portfolio rewrite. Start with the smallest version of the habit because the smallest version is the one that survives a busy month.
Next week, we're leaving the AI conversation behind for a bit and going somewhere that's been building for years, not just this season.
The creator economy swallowing the agency model whole. Individual creators building the entire stack themselves now. Content, product, education, software, all one person. No agency in the middle taking a cut.
Sounds like freedom until you realize how much of an agency's job was protecting people from doing all of that alone.
That's giving main character syndrome at industrial scale.
Hey,
I'm just saying, everybody's the CEO, the intern, and the janitor of their own brand now. It's a lot of hats for one head.
it kind of is. We'll get into it next week.
New episode drops Wednesday at 7. Thank you for listening to Empath.
Feel the creativity.
The path gets clearer 1 week at a time. This is Empath.
Empath is a partner podcast of Neon Alchemy BV. Story is how companies become human. We handle that part.